After my sister's husband, a wealthy financier with a taste for power, swindled me out of my business and betrayed our friendship, I never thought I'd be the one trying to sabotage the nuptials of the one person who's been helping me pick up the pieces. It started when he publicly humiliated me at a charity gala, shaming me in front of all my former colleagues for my failed business. The final blow was when he sold our shared assets and took most of the profits without even giving me a share. I felt like I'd been left to burn. But what really broke me was when he started courting my sister's best friend, Rachel. She's a business partner I hired just a few months ago, after everything with my ex-husband fell apart. At first, I thought she might be trustworthy. We bonded over our shared experience of being scammed and rebuilding from scratch. Now, as I watch her exchanging vows with the man who destroyed me, I feel like I'm living in a nightmare. We're supposed to be allies, Rachel and I. We've built something together, a thriving business that's helped us both start anew. But every time I try to reach out to her for support, she brushes me off or tells me it's not my problem. It's clear she's moved on with her life and doesn't want anything to do with mine anymore. That's when the plan started forming in my mind. Sabotage his wedding? It was a crazy idea, but I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Why shouldn't I be able to ruin his chance at happiness? I spent weeks gathering intel on Rachel's relationship with Rachel, codenamed Operation Heartless, and building a case against him. My plan would involve spreading rumors about his shady business dealings and making sure every guest knew about the scandalous affair between him and my sister. The day of the wedding arrived, and I was determined to put my plan into action. Rachel's best friend had warned me about the strict security measures in place, cameras everywhere, a team of private investigators on duty. But I wasn't intimidated. As we mingled with guests, Rachel slipped away for what she claimed was a quick phone call. I watched her from afar as she laughed and chatted with some acquaintances before making a move towards the venue's executive suite, where I knew the wedding party would be getting ready to depart. I snuck into the VIP area, avoiding security personnel by the skin of my teeth. The door was unlocked. Maybe Rachel had forgotten her keys or had an accomplice who let me in. My heart pounded as I took a deep breath and made my way to where they were supposed to be. I made my way through the crowded VIP area, avoiding security personnel by ducking behind a pillar and holding my breath. The door was unlocked, and I suspected Rachel had forgotten her keys or had an accomplice who let me in. My pulse quickened as I took another deep breath and moved swiftly towards where they were supposed to be. The air was thick with tension, and the soft hum of the event's sound system seemed amplified, making every conversation feel like a eavesdropping. I spotted Rachel across the room, her back to me, lost in conversation with someone. My heart sank as she turned around, our eyes locking for a brief moment before she smiled innocently. "Hey Lexi, what's going on?" Rachel asked, her voice dripping with a false warmth that made my skin crawl. I forced a smile and made my way towards her, trying to appear nonchalant despite the turmoil brewing inside me. "Just wanted to see how everything was going," I lied, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of Olivia, my gaze lingering on Rachel's face as if searching for something in her expression. Rachel's gaze followed mine, her expression shifting from warmth to annoyance. "You're not exactly invited to this party, Lexi," she said, her voice laced with a condescending tone that made my shoulders stiffen in response. I felt a familiar burn in my chest, one that I'd grown accustomed to over the years, a mix of anger and hurt that threatened to boil over at any moment. But I kept my tone clipped, not rising to her bait. "Guess I lost track," I said, my voice firm but detached. We exchanged small talk for a few minutes before Rachel excused herself, citing an emergency call from Olivia. As soon as she left, I felt a surge of anxiety. What was going on with my sister and Olivia? And why did it have to happen now? I spotted Olivia across the room, chatting enthusiastically with Victoria Wellesley, my long-lost sister. They exchanged warm smiles, and for an instant, their faces seemed to relax, the tension between them momentarily dissipating. "Looks like we're both getting ready for the big day," Olivia said, her voice dripping with an insincere sweetness, her words spilling out in a rapid, nervous rhythm. My mind reeled as I watched them laugh together, their body language radiating a false sense of camaraderie. I shifted my weight, my eyes fixed on Victoria's face, searching for any sign of guilt or remorse. But her smile remained saccharine sweet, and I knew then that nothing would ever be the same again. As Victoria's eyes locked onto mine, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, and I saw the faintest glimmer of Olivia's reflection in her gaze, a fleeting moment of recognition that made my heart skip a beat. Olivia's eyes, however, remained fixed on Victoria, a mixture of desperation and warning flashing across her face before she quickly looked away, leaving me with a single, chilling question: what had Olivia seen? I watched Olivia's smile falter for a fraction of a second before she returned her gaze to Victoria, leaving me with the unsettling feeling that I'd stumbled upon a secret. The air was thick with tension as we stood there, locked in a silent understanding that would take an eternity to unravel. Victoria's eyes never left mine, but I sensed the weight of her gaze, like a physical presence that pressed against my skin. Her smile grew sweeter still, a saccharine veneer masking the darkness beneath. "I'm so glad we're getting to know each other, Olivia," Victoria said, her voice dripping with insincere warmth, the words seeming to slide across her face like a thin layer of oil. I felt a pang in my chest, a sensation that twisted and turned like a knot, threatening to overwhelm me. But I bit back the words, knowing they wouldn't get me anywhere. Not now. Olivia was standing right there, between us, her eyes flashing with desperation and warning, the warning signs of a woman on the verge of panic. My mind replayed the events leading up to this moment: Victoria's sudden interest in Olivia, her constant accidental meetings, her saccharine sweetness that grated on my nerves. But I had never seen a glimmer of genuine concern until now, when Olivia's eyes met Victoria's, and I saw a flicker of something that made me want to scream. "I'm going to get you a drink, Lexi," Rachel, our PR specialist, said, her voice low and urgent, the words drawing me out of my reverie like a lifeline. I glanced around the room, searching for a way out, a distraction from this suffocating tension. That's when I spotted Rachel, our PR specialist, hovering near the bar like a ghost. She caught my eye and raised an eyebrow, her expression questioning. I nodded subtly, and she made her way towards me. "Lexi, we need to talk," Rachel said, her voice still low and urgent, the words spilling out of her like a confession. "I've been going over Olivia's phone records, and there are some discrepancies." My heart skipped a beat as Rachel pulled out her phone and began scrolling through the records. My eyes locked onto hers, waiting for something, anything, to shift this entire situation. "What kind of discrepancies?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, the words tumbling out of me like a hesitant confession. Rachel hesitated for a moment, her voice tinged with concern, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. "It looks like Olivia has been receiving suspicious calls from Victoria in the months leading up to the wedding." My mind reeled as I processed this new information. Why hadn't Olivia told me? And what did she see that made her desperation physical, like a living thing that pulsed through her veins? As we continued to discuss the records, my eyes darted back to Olivia, who stood frozen between us, her eyes fixed on Victoria's engagement ring gleaming in the light, the glint of metal a cold and unforgiving presence. And then, just as I was about to ask Rachel another question, our PR specialist froze, her phone slipping from her fingers. As I lunged to catch the phone, my fingers closing around it just as it fell, Olivia's eyes snapped to mine, a silent scream trapped behind her mask of concern, and in that instant, I saw the truth: Victoria's smile was a lie, and Olivia's desperation was no longer just a warning, but a desperate plea for help. Just as Victoria's gaze locked onto Olivia's, a faint whisper escaped Olivia's lips. "What did you tell him, Victoria?" I watched Olivia's eyes lock onto Victoria's, a silent scream trapped behind her mask of concern. The phone in my hand slipped to my side, forgotten, as I gazed at my sister. Her smile was still plastered on her face, but it looked different now, calculated. Victoria's gaze never wavered from Olivia's. "So, Lexi," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth, "we were just discussing the details of our little family gathering. I'm so glad you could make it." Her eyes flickered to me for a moment before returning to Olivia, who looked like she was about to collapse. I felt my anger rise, but I forced myself to stay calm, my jaw clenched into a tight line. We needed to keep this up if we were going to stop Victoria's wedding and expose the truth. But as I watched Olivia, I noticed something that made my gut twist with a sense of foreboding, a faint bruise on her wrist, hidden beneath her sleeve. It was a small thing, easily missed, but it told me everything. "Victoria, what are you planning?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing, dear sister," Victoria said, her voice sugary sweet. "Just the usual family shenanigans. But I'm so glad we're all here together to celebrate. Olivia took a step back, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. My heart went out to her, but my brain was already racing ahead, thinking of ways to stop Victoria and Olivia's wedding. But as I looked at Olivia, I saw something that gave me pause, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a hint that she knew more than she was letting on. "Olivia," I said softly, trying not to alarm her further. "What did you tell him?" Victoria's gaze snapped back to mine, and for an instant, I saw the true extent of her cruelty. Her eyes narrowed, and her smile faltered, just for a moment. "I told him nothing, Lexi," she said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "Just the usual family gossip." But as we watched, Olivia's eyes flickered again, this time to me. And in that instant, I saw something that made my blood run cold. "What did you tell him?" Victoria repeated, her voice rising to a false note of innocence. "I told him about your family business," Olivia said, her voice dripping with malice. "About how we're going to make sure our family's secrets are kept safe." Victoria's eyes snapped back to mine, and I felt a jolt of fear, my breath catching in my throat. Her face went white, just for an instant, before her mask slipped back into place. But it was enough. And then, without warning, the lights in the room began to flicker. "What are you doing?" Olivia demanded, her voice rising. But I didn't answer. But just as Victoria's eyes locked onto Olivia's, her face contorted into a grotesque grimace, and she lunged at Olivia, a sound that made my blood run colder. Olivia's wedding ring was now on Victoria's finger, clutched in her hand as if it had always been there. Victoria's eyes never left Olivia's, but I saw a flicker of something else, triumph, as she whispered, "The end is just the beginning." I stared at Olivia's hand, my mind reeling with every step of this twisted scenario. Victoria's face had transformed before my eyes, from a sugary sweet smile to a snarling grimace. The sound that came out was one of pure venom, a hiss that sent a shiver down my spine. And then I saw it, Olivia's wedding ring now adorned on Victoria's finger, a cold calculation radiating from her as she gazed at my sister. For a moment, our eyes locked in a silent understanding. We both knew this was far from over. "Olivia, darling," Victoria said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness, "I think it's time we celebrated our new partnership. The end is just the beginning." I watched Olivia's hand tense, but it seemed to be holding firm against Victoria's grasp. The ring now seemed to be a symbol of ownership, a declaration that she now owned Olivia's life, her business, and her future. "I don't know what's going on, but I don't like it," Olivia said, her voice firm but uncertain, her eyes darting to mine for reassurance. I couldn't believe I was watching this unfold. All my worst fears were coming true. I had been so blinded by what I thought was sisterly love that I'd ignored the warning signs. The gifts from an unknown sender still swirled in my mind, a mysterious connection to Victoria's wedding ring. It felt like more than just a coincidence now. My thoughts were racing as I made a split-second decision. I didn't want to get caught up in Olivia's emotional turmoil. I needed a clear head if I was going to take down Victoria once and for all. With a calm that belied the storm brewing inside me, I took a deep breath and began to make my move. But just as I started to gather my strength, just as I prepared to confront Victoria about this revelation, everything came crashing down around me. My eyes landed on something on Olivia's phone screen, something that made my heart sink. "Looks like you're not the only one who's next on the list," Victoria said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness, "but I'm afraid that's not a concern for you right now. You're too busy trying to protect your precious little sister." Olivia's fingers flew to her mouth, and she let out a sharp gasp. A text message from an unknown sender, a single sentence that cut through the air like a cold wind, Olivia said, her voice firm and resolute, her eyes locked on Victoria's. Olivia's eyes flashed with a mixture of fear and anger, and she suddenly yanked her hand free from Victoria's grasp, the ring flying off her finger and onto the floor with a metallic clatter. Victoria's expression didn't change, but her voice dropped to a menacing whisper, "Looks like you're not ready to play nice, little sister." Olivia's eyes never left Victoria's face as she stood there, her chest heaving with a mix of fear and anger. The ring that had once symbolized their sisterly bond now lay on the floor, a mocking reminder of Victoria's betrayal. "Looks like you're not ready to play nice, little sister," Victoria whispered, her voice dripping with malice. Olivia's gaze locked onto Victoria's, her jaw clenched in response to the venomous words. Her hand trembled as she tried to speak, but the sound that came out was barely above a whisper. The tension in her body was palpable as she struggled to regain control of herself, her words tumbling out in a tight, strained hiss. "How dare you," she spat, trying to regain composure. Victoria's expression remained serene, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of curiosity. She took a step closer to Olivia, her voice dropping even lower, her tone sugary sweet. The way her words dripped with condescension made Olivia's skin crawl. Olivia's anger boiled over, and she launched herself at Victoria, tackling her to the ground. The two women wrestled, their bodies entwined as they fought for dominance. Finally, Olivia managed to pin Victoria down, her hands digging deep into her sister's shoulders. The sound of Olivia's ragged breathing filled the air as she hissed, her eyes blazing with fury, her voice laced with venom. "I'm done being your plaything, Victoria," Olivia hissed, her eyes flashing with intensity. Victoria struggled beneath Olivia's grip, but she refused to back down, her voice still dripping with false sincerity. "You're not strong enough to stop me, Liv. I'll always get what I want." The words sent a shiver down Olivia's spine, but she refused to yield. With a surge of adrenaline, Olivia ripped Victoria's arm from her grasp and stood up, her back against the wall. The air seemed to vibrate with tension as Olivia spat, her words a warning. Victoria's smile was a thin-lipped line as she rose to her feet, her eyes never leaving Olivia's face. "I'll be right there for your wedding day," she said, her voice dripping with malice, the words like a poison gift. The sound of Olivia's ragged breathing grew more labored as she struggled to catch her breath. Olivia felt like she'd been punched in the gut, but she refused to crumble. She took a step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of her own ragged breathing filled the air as she spat, her words a harsh denial. The tension between them was almost unbearable. Victoria's smile grew wider as she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. Her eyes locked onto Olivia's, the words on the paper gleaming like a promise, her voice still sugary sweet. Victoria's smile faltered for an instant, and Olivia's eyes narrowed as she saw a glimmer of uncertainty behind the surface. With a sudden movement, Victoria's hand dropped to her pocket, and Olivia's eyes locked onto the spot where her father's letter seemed to be. "You're not taking me down without going through the will," Olivia spat, her voice low and deadly. Lexi's eyes never left Victoria's face as she glared at Olivia, her voice low and deadly. "You're not taking me down without going through the will." The air was thick with tension, each word feeling like a punch to Lexi's gut. Olivia's gaze darted between her sister and mother, her eyes flashing with anger. Victoria's smile never wavered, but Lexi caught the faintest flicker of unease behind her mother's polished facade. Without warning, Olivia turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, leaving Lexi and Victoria alone in the stunned silence that followed. Victoria took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling with a deliberate slowness, before speaking for the first time since the confrontation began. "Lexi, darling, I think we need to talk," Victoria said, her voice like syrup, sweet and sticky. "What is this about, Victoria?" Lexi asked, her tone clipped and guarded, a defense mechanism she'd honed over years of being hurt by her sister. Victoria's hands settled on her hips, a subtle gesture of confidence. "It's about our family legacy," she said, her voice dripping with saccharine, and Olivia's place in it. "We should discuss how to ensure the family business continues to thrive." Lexi's mind reeled at Victoria's words. Partners? But they'd never discussed anything like a business partnership outside of their family's company. "I don't understand what you're getting at, Victoria," Lexi said, trying to keep her tone even, but feeling a spark of unease ignite within her. Victoria's eyes locked onto Lexi's, a hint of condescension dancing in their depths. "Oh, come now, Lexi," she said, "don't pretend you're not aware of the situation. We both know that our family's fortune is at stake, and Olivia's inheritance is crucial to securing it." Lexi's heart skipped a beat at the words. Her family's fortune? The very thing they'd fought over for years? A sudden chill ran down her spine as she realized how close Victoria was to achieving her goal. But before Lexi could react further, Victoria reached into her pocket and produced a small, leather-bound book. She opened it with a deliberate creak, revealing yellowed pages filled with handwritten notes. "This is our family's history, Lexi," Victoria said, her voice sugaring the edges of her words, "our business legacy. Olivia's place in it is complicated. As Lexi's eyes scanned the pages, she felt a cold dread creeping up her spine. The words on those pages told a story of deceit and betrayal, one that made Lexi's breath catch in her throat. And then, just as she was about to speak, Victoria slammed the book shut, her face alight with triumph. The sound of the phone ringing broke the silence, a jarring contrast to Victoria's satisfied expression. "It seems we have some." Victoria's eyes locked onto Lexi's, a hint of condescension dancing in their depths. Victoria's eyes locked onto Lexi's, a hint of condescension dancing in their depths, as she leaned in closer, her voice taking on a menacing tone. "You think you can stop me, Lexi, or will you finally do what I've been waiting for?" The phone still rang on the table, its silence now deafening, as Victoria's hand closed around the receiver, her fingers closing around it like a vice. Victoria's eyes locked onto Lexi's, a hint of condescension dancing in their depths. She leaned in closer, her voice taking on a menacing tone. "You think you can stop me, Lexi, or will you finally do what I've been waiting for?" The phone still rang on the table, its silence now deafening, as Victoria's hand closed around the receiver, her fingers closing around it like a vice. Lexi's heart rate quickened, and she felt a flutter in her chest as she met Victoria's gaze. "I'm not going to let you ruin my life, Victoria. You can't just marry Olivia behind my back." Victoria's smile grew wider, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "Oh, Lexi, it's so sweet of you to care. But I've made up my mind. Olivia and I have been working on our family business together for years now. She owes me a debt she can never fully repay." Lexi's anger simmered just below the surface, but she bit back her retort, her jaw tightening. She knew Victoria was hiding something, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. Victoria's gaze lingered on Lexi's face before returning to the phone. The receiver slipped from her grasp, and she had to grab it again, her hand closing around it with a sudden, tense movement. "I think I'll just call Olivia myself and make sure everything is in order." As Victoria lifted the receiver off the hook, Lexi noticed a faint tremble in Victoria's hand, a subtle jerk of her wrist as she spoke. "Victoria, I don't think that's a good idea," Olivia said, her voice firm but her words laced with a hidden fear. Victoria's voice turned icy, and her eyes flashed with annoyance, but her face remained smooth. She slammed down the phone, the sound of the receiver thudding against the table a stark contrast to her calm demeanor. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, Victoria's composure snapped, her face twisting into a snarl that made Lexi's skin crawl. For an instant, her eyes locked onto Lexi's, a hint of genuine rage burning in their depths. But before Lexi could process what she was seeing, Victoria's expression smoothed out once more, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness again. Victoria's face twisted into a snarl that made Lexi's skin crawl, her eyes flashing with genuine rage as she slammed the receiver back onto the hook, her voice low and deadly. "Olivia, I see you've been playing both sides. You're not going to use my family business against me, are you?" The room fell silent, the only sound the heavy breathing of the two women, as Victoria's gaze locked onto Lexi's, a challenge burning in her eyes. "You're not the only one with secrets, Lexi." Victoria's face twisted into a snarl that made Lexi's skin crawl, her eyes flashing with genuine rage as she slammed the receiver back onto the hook, her voice low and deadly. "Olivia, I see you've been playing both sides. You're not going to use my family business against me, are you?" The room fell silent, the only sound the heavy breathing of the two women, as Victoria's gaze locked onto Lexi's, a challenge burning in her eyes. Lexi's heart rate quickened, her hand tightening around the edge of the couch as if she could grasp something solid. She had been expecting this reaction from her sister all along. After all, Victoria's past betrayals had left deep scars on Lexi's psyche. The sound of Olivia's laughter echoed in her mind, reminding her that Victoria was a master manipulator, always playing the victim to get what she wanted. Victoria took a step closer, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "Lexi, sweetie, I'm just trying to protect our family's interests. You know how it is, business can be cutthroat." Lexi's eyes narrowed, her mind racing with all the ways Victoria could be lying. The fact that Olivia had been playing both sides was already a deal breaker. Now Victoria was trying to spin this as some kind of altruistic move? "Olivia is my business partner, not yours," Lexi said, her voice even but laced with warning. Her eyes flashed with annoyance. Victoria's smile grew wider, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Oh, I think Olivia will come to see things our way soon enough. And when she does, you'll be left standing alone." The word stung, making Lexi's jaw ache with a familiar sensation of betrayal. "Get out," Lexi spat, turning away from Victoria and stalking toward the door, her heels clicking on the floor. "I won't leave until this is settled," Victoria said, her tone dripping with condescension. "You can't handle the truth, Lexi." Her voice dripped with superiority. Lexi's hand on the doorknob hesitated for a fraction of a second before she spun around to face her sister once more, her eyes locking with Victoria's in a silent challenge, a battle of wits and wills. The door swung open with a sudden jolt, as if it had been forced off its hinges by some unseen force. The sound sent both women stumbling backward, their hands grasping for balance on the sleek wooden floor. The air seemed to thicken as Victoria's smile faltered, her eyes locked onto Lexi's with an unnerving intensity, and she whispered, "The truth, Lexi, is that Olivia's life is already mine to shape and mold, and soon, it will be yours too." Lexi's eyes never left Victoria's face as she took a step back, her hand grasping for balance on the floor. The sudden jolt had sent both women stumbling backward, their heads nodding against the sleek wooden floor. The force of the fall sent a shiver up Lexi's spine. "I see," Lexi said finally, her voice tight and a hint of unease laced within it. Victoria's smile faltered for an instant before she regained control. "I want you to understand, Lexi. Olivia and I have a history together. We've always been close." Victoria's eyes never left Lexi's face as she continued, her words dripping with saccharine sweetness, but with a hint of menace. "We've been friends since we were children. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to keep that friendship alive." Lexi's gaze narrowed as she watched Victoria's smile grow wider. She knew that look, the one that seemed to hide 1,000 secrets behind its sugary surface. But what did Victoria have planned this time? "I see," Lexi repeated, her voice barely above a whisper, her skepticism evident in her tone. Victoria took another step forward, her eyes locked onto Lexi's face. "I'm going to marry Olivia soon, and I need you to know that you're more than welcome to be a part of our special day." Victoria's smile grew even wider as she added, "After all, we've always been such good friends." Lexi's fingers flexed into a tight fist as anger rose up within her, but it was quickly followed by a cold, calculating sense of determination. She would not let Victoria get away with this. "I need to talk to Olivia," Lexi said finally, her voice firm and resolute, with a hint of finality. Victoria's smile faltered for an instant before she regained control once more. "I'm sure that can be arranged." But as she spoke, her eyes darted to the side, a fleeting glance at something behind Lexi that made her raise an eyebrow. Lexi turned to see what had caught Victoria's attention, but there was nothing out of the ordinary in sight. Just the familiar backdrop of their office, with its sleek wooden floor and high ceilings. And then, as she looked closer, Lexi saw a piece of paper on the floor, partially hidden under the couch. It was a news article, one that had been circulating online for weeks but which Lexi had yet to see. The headline read, "Victoria Wellesley's financial scandal exposed, former business partner accused of embezzlement." Lexi's eyes widened as she read the name on the document. Victoria's former business partner was none other than Rachel, Lexi's ex-best friend and confidant. But that wasn't all. The article also mentioned a mysterious trust fund set up in Rachel's name, one which was rumored to be worth millions. Suddenly, everything clicked into place for Lexi. She realized that Victoria had been using Olivia as a pawn in her game all along, manipulating her sister and their business partner to get what she wanted. And now, with the truth finally out, Lexi felt a sense of satisfaction wash over her. Lexi's eyes locked onto Victoria's, the fury in Victoria's gaze a stark contrast to the saccharine sweetness that had preceded it. Victoria's face twisted, her eyes flashing with a mix of anger and desperation, as she took a step closer, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper, "You'll never be happy with Olivia, Lexi." Lexi's eyes never left Victoria's, her gaze burning with a mix of fury and determination. The saccharine sweetness that had characterized their sisterly interactions for so long now seemed like a facade, a thin veil hiding the true nature of Victoria's intentions. "You're making a huge mistake, Lexi," Victoria cooed, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. Her smile was a thin, practiced thing, a mask that betrayed no emotion. You'll never be happy with Olivia. She's insecure, unworthy. Lexi's hand clenched into a fist, the knuckles white with tension. She knew better than to let Victoria get under her skin. I'm not the one who's been manipulating people behind their backs, Lexi replied, her tone clipped and guarded, avoiding direct answers. Victoria's eyes narrowed, and her pupils constricted, a tiny, telling sign of her anger. Victoria's eyes flashed with anger, but she forced a saccharine smile onto her face. Her eyes crinkled at the corners, a faint hint of cruelty lurking beneath the surface. Lexi felt a pang of guilt, but she pushed it aside. She knew Victoria was lying, and she had proof. The text message on Olivia's phone, the suspicious calls to Victoria's number, it all added up. Her mind was a whirl of conflicting emotions, but her expression remained neutral. I want you to leave, Lexi said finally, her tone firm but controlled. The words tumbled out of her like a challenge, a dare to see how far Victoria would push her. Victoria's smile grew whiter, more sinister. Victoria's smile faltered, revealing a flash of white beneath, as she lunged at Lexi, her hands grasping for her throat, and Lexi's eyes widened in shock as Victoria's words came out in a venomous whisper, "You'll never stop me." Lexi's hands clenched into fists as she backed away from Victoria's lunging form. The air was thick with tension, her heart racing with every snap of their branches against each other. Victoria's face twisted into a snarl, her eyes flashing with a fierce intensity that made Lexi's skin crawl. "You're a monster," Lexi spat, her voice laced with venom. She tried to keep her tone steady, but her words were a reflection of the anger simmering beneath her surface. Victoria's expression never wavered, but her voice took on a sugary sweetness that made Lexi's stomach twist with anger. "Lexi, please. I'm not a monster. I just want what's best for our family." The words dripped with insincerity, and Lexi's eyes narrowed. Lexi's gaze darted around the room, searching for an escape route, but Victoria was too quick. She lunged again, her branches snapping wildly as Lexi backed away, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the room as Lexi stumbled towards the door, Victoria hot on her heels. Lexi flung open the door and sprinted out into the hallway, the sound of Victoria's angry cry echoing off the walls. She didn't stop running until she reached the safety of her office, where she slammed the door shut behind her and leaned against it, panting heavily. Her mind was still racing with thoughts of what Victoria had just said. Lexi's phone buzzed on her desk, and she snatched it up, her eyes scanning the screen before she dialed Olivia's number. Olivia's hesitant voice was on the other end of the line, and Lexi's grip on the phone tightened as she began to explain the events that had just transpired. "Olivia, I think Victoria's planning something. She's been acting strange lately, and I'm starting to think she's not what she seems." Olivia's voice was laced with uncertainty. "What do you mean?" Lexi's words tumbled out in a rush. "I mean, she's been trying to make amends, but I don't think it's genuine. I think she's using our wedding as a way to get what she wants." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Olivia spoke up. "Lexi, I don't know what to do." Lexi's anger boiled over, and she felt a surge of frustration. "You have to be careful, Olivia. Victoria's not someone to be trusted." As Lexi spoke, Rachel, their former best friend and business partner, caught her eye. Rachel was chatting with Olivia near the entrance, and Lexi's expression hardened. She knew Victoria's tactics all too well, the manipulation, the guilt trips, the calculated cruelty. Lexi's eyes narrowed as she thought back to the suspicious phone records, the cryptic messages, the hastily deleted social media posts. It was all too convenient, too calculated. Victoria wasn't marrying Olivia for love, she was doing it for something else entirely. Olivia's voice was hesitant as she spoke up. "Lexi, I don't know what to do." Lexi's grip on the phone tightened. "You have to listen to me, Olivia." Lexi's phone call was cut off as Victoria's eyes locked onto Olivia, her expression twisted into a venomous smile. The door to Olivia's office slid open, and Victoria's hands were already extended, holding a small, white envelope. "Congratulations, Lexi," Victoria purred, her voice dripping with malice, "you're going to be the maid of honor." Lexi's phone call was cut off as Victoria's eyes locked onto Olivia, her expression twisted into a venomous smile. The door to Olivia's office slid open, and Victoria's hands were already extended, holding a small, white envelope. "Congratulations, Lexi," Victoria purred, her voice dripping with malice, "you're going to be the maid of honor." Lexi felt a knot form in her stomach as she struggled to respond, her mind racing with the implications of Victoria's words. The wedding, which had been looming over her like a specter, seemed suddenly much closer. She thought back to all the times Olivia had mentioned Victoria, how she would often slip up and mention something about her sister being so excited for their special day. Lexi forced herself to take a deep breath and try again. "Victoria, I don't know what you're talking about." Victoria's smile grew wider as she handed Lexi the envelope. "Oh, come on, Lexi. Don't play dumb. We both know how much we've been lying to each other for years." Victoria's voice was like honey, sweet and innocent, but Lexi could see the venom lurking just beneath the surface. Lexi felt a surge of anger at her sister's words, but she bit it back. She needed to keep her cool if she was going to uncover the truth about Olivia's relationship with Victoria. "What are you talking about?" she repeated, trying to keep her voice even. Victoria snorted. "Don't pretend like you don't know, Lexi. I've been watching you, studying you. And I know all about your little accidental phone call to me last month." Lexi's eyes narrowed as she tried to process Victoria's words. How had she known? She was certain that Olivia must have told her something, but they had never spoken about it before. "What are you going to do with this information?" Lexi asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. Victoria's smile grew even wider as she leaned in closer to Olivia. "Oh, I think we'll be having a little chat soon," she said, her voice dripping with menace. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the conversation was over. Victoria turned and walked back out of the office, leaving Lexi feeling stunned and confused. Lexi sat down in Olivia's chair, trying to process everything that had just happened. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her as she thought about what Victoria might be planning. She knew one thing for sure: she would stop at nothing to prevent it from happening. Lexi sat in Olivia's chair, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of what was happening. The wedding decorations were still up, but an air of unease clung to everything like a bad omen. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her as she thought about Victoria's words, "You're just being paranoid, Lexi." The word stung, but Lexi's gut told her otherwise. Olivia walked into the room, her eyes darting around the space before locking onto Lexi's. Her expression was nervous, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her dress. "I'm sorry, Lexi," she said quietly, trying to infuse sweetness into her tone. Lexi's gaze narrowed. "How could you?" she repeated, her voice laced with skepticism. Olivia took a step closer, her eyes pleading for understanding. Lexi crossed her arms, her expression unyielding. The silence between them was oppressive, heavy with unspoken words. Lexi's eyes dropped to the coffee table, where Victoria's phone lay open. A text message caught her eye, a name that looked suspiciously like code. Lexi's grip on the table edge tightened, her mind racing with questions. Why was Victoria sending texts to Olivia under fake names? And what about those emails about family business? It all seemed too calculated, too deliberate. Just as Lexi was about to confront Olivia, the doorbell rang, cutting through the tension. Lexi sighed and walked over to answer it. "Victoria," she said, her tone firm but not unfriendly. Victoria's expression faltered for a moment, her sugary sweetness wavering. But she recovered quickly, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "Oh, Rachel Wellesley, Olivia Lee's mother-in-law," she said, her eyes flashing with a hint of menace. Lexi's eyes locked onto Victoria's, searching for any sign of deception. Victoria's gaze flickered, and for an instant, Lexi saw something else, a glimmer of the sister she thought she knew. But it was quickly extinguished, replaced by the familiar mask of innocence. "I didn't know you were expecting me," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with insincerity. Victoria's eyes seemed to flash with a hint of recognition, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she regained her composure. Victoria's eyes locked onto Lexi's, her expression faltering for a fraction of a second before she regained her composure, her pupils constricting into tiny slits that seemed to bore into Lexi's very soul. The air between them grew heavier, the silence now weighted with the unspoken accusation that Victoria's mask of innocence was beginning to crack, revealing a face Lexi had thought she'd never see again. Victoria's eyes locked onto Lexi's, a fleeting moment of unease flashing across her face before she regained her composure. The air between them felt heavy, the silence now weighted like a physical force that pressed against Lexi's chest. "I'm so glad we could finally meet in person," Victoria said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness, but the words sounded forced, like they were being pulled from her mouth through teeth. Her lips curled into a tight smile. Lexi raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. She knew better than to trust Victoria's honey-toned speech, which was laced with venomous intent. A faint sheen of sweat appeared on Victoria's forehead. "I've heard that," Lexi said dryly, her voice clipped and guarded. "But I'm more interested in knowing why you're getting married." Victoria's smile faltered, and for an instant, Lexi saw a glimmer of the old Victoria, the one who had been cruel and manipulative to everyone around her. But then the mask slipped back into place, and she was herself again, perfect, polished, and infuriatingly self-satisfied. Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Oh, it's just a little wedding," Victoria said, waving her hand dismissively, her voice smooth as silk. "Olivia and I are simply thrilled to start this new chapter in our lives, aren't we, Lexi?" Lexi felt a spark of anger ignite within her, her fingers tightening into fists. She knew that Olivia was hiding something from her, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. And now, with Victoria's admission, Lexi realized that the wedding was just a smokescreen for something far more sinister. Her heart quickened. "You're not exactly known for your transparency," Lexi said coolly, trying to keep her tone light. "What makes you think Olivia is ready for this?" Victoria's pupils constricted into tiny slits as she gazed at Lexi, her eyes flashing with a warning. "I'm sure Olivia will make the right decision," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sincerity, her words dripping with condescension. Her lips curled into a patronizing smile. The word common hung in the air like a challenge, and Lexi's gut twisted with suspicion. She knew that Victoria was hiding something, but she couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. Her brow furrowed in concentration. "I see," Lexi said finally, her voice even. "Well, I think Olivia deserves to make her own decisions about her life." Victoria's smile returned, and this time, it seemed to be aimed directly at Lexi. "Of course you do, Lexi," Victoria said. "You've always been such a champion for women's rights and freedom. A true ally to women everywhere." Victoria's smile seemed to grow wider, her eyes glinting with a cold light, as she replied, "You're a true friend, Lexi. One of the few who can see through my facade."